and then we all have to. So we're accepting that we're being recorded here. And so, hello, I'm Emily Silliman, and welcome to Potluck Insurgency's event entitled the 2023 Iowa Legislature, What to Freak Out About and What to Do About It. Potluck Insurgency was founded in 2017 and has the stated purpose to support democratic values, and that's with a large D, Democratic Party values, and to elect Democrats. Meetings from the beginning were actual potlucks in people's homes with a candidate or a featured speaker. Always included at the end was a call to action. Since the pandemic, we have held some in-person events, but have also learned the joys of Zoom. A benefit of Zoom is that on a February evening such as this one, more people can participate who live further away. If you would like to be on the potluck mailing list, please leave us a note in the chat and we will sign you up. We have your email addresses, so you don't need to leave your email address, just drop a note. I have the honor of introducing the first two speakers. I will introduce them both at the same time, and then we will start from there. Zach Walls, who will be joining us a little later, was elected to the Iowa State Senate in 2018 and was recently reelected in District 43, which includes Coralville, North Liberty, Solon, parts of Western Iowa City, and parts of rural Johnson County. Zach briefly went east to earn a master's degree in public policy at Princeton, but at heart, he is an activist and has always focused on Iowa. His 2011 speech on the right of all people to marry the person they choose is famous, rightly so, but his activism never stopped there. I was at the Capitol in Des Moines a week or so ago and caught Zach Walls red-handed strategizing with a pair of high school students on how to more effectively organize around their particular issue. Since 2020, Zach has been the leader of the Democrats in the Iowa Senate. As part of that role, Zach is one of the people who will be helping Democrats statewide strategize on how to win more elections. Jennifer Confrist was elected to the Iowa House of Representatives in 2018 and has been reelected twice, and currently represents House District 32, which includes Clive, Windsor Heights, and parts of West Des Moines. Jennifer worked for Iowa Public Television for 12 years and is currently an associate professor at Drake University's School of Journalism and Mass Communication. She was active at the PTA level on education issues and currently serves as the ranking Democrat on the Education Committee. In 2021, she became the first woman to serve as the minority leader in the Iowa House, leader of the Democrats, that is. Even before assuming that role, which gives statewide reach to her efforts to elect Democrats, she was not a stranger to us in Johnson County, and we appreciate that she is once again joining us tonight. Take it away, Jennifer.
Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. I have enjoyed coming to see many of you in Johnson County many times, including a time when I came for an event that many of you might have been at and caught food poisoning on the way to the event and had to spend the entire, a couple people nodding, that's incredibly embarrassing, had to spend the entire time in the back of my car while my dad came and read my speech off of my phone when I was running in 2018. And then somebody said, there's a lady in the car and she's throwing up outside of the truck. And someone said, yeah, that's our guest speaker. She's not welcome. So, you know, not always an auspicious beginning, but since then I've loved getting to come and see you. And I have a junior at the University of Iowa who always is happy to let me take him to lunch when I visit. So I'm thrilled to have the chance to talk with you all today. Thanks for the introduction and for having me. You know, my job is to give an overall look at what bills to, I guess, freak out about, and kind of what's coming up at the legislature. And I believe that I'm filling some time until Zach comes in. So I will just, I do it all the time. I will kind of go through some of the things in categories. So I sort of, this legislative session feels a lot like the 2017 legislative session. Those of you who followed that year, I wasn't here, but that's the year I decided to, run again. I ran in 2016 and lost to the House Majority Leader, and was not going to run again because it is no fun to lose. And then was at home watching the legislature in the 2017 session when they gutted collective bargaining. Many of you remember that debate. It was just a few years ago this month. And I decided to run again in February of 2017 because of how terrible the session was. Well, now here we are. And it does seem like we're back in a session a lot like that. It's been very rushed. It's been very hurried. And it has been full steam ahead since the minute we hit the ground. So as you heard from Emily, that I am the ranking member on the Education Reform Committee. That is a new committee that Speaker Grassley and Leader Winchell created this year for the sole purpose of passing school vouchers. And we also passed some rules for the House that said that any bill that went through the Education Reform Committee would not have to go through the appropriations process. So they've been, pushing that bill through, just doing whatever they could to get it passed, and they did get it passed here last a couple of weeks ago, I guess, feels like a couple of years ago at this point. And then it was off to the races for supplemental state aid. Democrats have been trying throughout the entire session to not just vote no on things, but to introduce amendments and standalone legislation to show what we stand for, so that it's not just us voting no all the time. So we did not put any amendments out on the school voucher bill because, to put it bluntly, there's nothing that can make that bill better, except unless it was a strike after that just said only public education, and that probably wouldn't have made the point. So we did propose a $267 million increase in funding for our public schools. And that number came from the fact that there had been a $107 million allocation to private schools this year through the school voucher program, and then a large allocation for corporate tax cuts. So we figured if there's enough money in the state budget for corporate tax cuts and private schools, they should be able to get at least that much of an increase to public schools, since about 44,000 kids will benefit from school vouchers at its peak, and there are 485,000 Iowa kids in public schools. So we fought that as well, proposed that. We obviously were not successful, but we think that we made a good point and got some good Senate and House coverage there of what our priorities are, and we think that's important. We have a lot of stuff coming up. We just had a medical malpractice bill. We just had, we have some a trucker tort reform bill coming up. And so I will start with sort of non-education stuff, because so much of it is targeting our kids. So the trucker tort legislation that you might have heard about is, it is limiting liability, or in some cases eliminating liability, for trucking companies for negligent hiring of truck drivers if there's a resulting accident or death. And this is a bill that is incredibly it's a big gift to the trucking industry. And I did have a Republican tell me that we needed to have this bill because no truckers are coming to Iowa because of our insurance rates. And I don't know, I live about 10 minutes away from the 80-35 interchange, and I have not noticed a shortage of trucks. So I do not believe that that is the reason for this legislation. So we're fighting that up at the Capitol, and we're also, continuing to look out for legislation that would make it easier for polluters, legislation that would, we're looking closely at a pipeline bill that just was filed on Thursday. There are some things to like in that bill, some things not to like in that bill. And so I was supposed to read it today, but I was down in Knoxville and came right to you. So I imagine that's what will be my bedtime reading tonight. And we're looking at that to see what that looks like. If the governor signs any sort of limitation on pipelines, I will be absolutely blown away. I can't fathom something gets to the governor's desk, but we'll see. Also, there's a giant government reorganization bill that's out there. And that bill is between 1,500 and 1,700 pages, depending on the margins of your printer. And it is a large bill that essentially is a power grab from the governor to get every bit of power that she wants. So this is not me being cynical, though I am about anything the governor does, but it is truly the phrase that I see most frequently when I read that bill is serve at the pleasure of the governor. Will serve at the pleasure of the governor. So it's taking away appointments, or making it easier to get appointments out of the Senate, taking a lot of things out of the approval process altogether. One of the things it does is it takes the Department of Management, Department of Revenue, and Department of Economic Development directors out of the salary scale so that they can receive giant salaries of taxpayer money, because apparently we are not able to be competitive. If I were the Department of Revenue, Department of Management, or Economic Development Authority director, I wouldn't be very complimented by that fact, since they've been working on the current salary schedule. It also it eliminates the number of departments from 36 to or 37 to 16, something like that. But it doesn't save a lot of money, and I think that's important to understand. Is that there's a lot of talk about how this is government efficiency bill. It does not save a lot of money, and a lot of the money that is saved is coming from federal money that we will no longer draw down. And so it's not really savings, it's just that positions that are paid with federal money will no longer get that money. So it's not really a great taxpayer benefit here. It is a power grab from the governor. When I read it, I think she thinks that it will never again be a Democratic governor, because if a Democratic governor had this much power, they would lose their minds. And so as we look at it, it is overreach. It is centralizing of power from the party that likes local control and small government. It is the opposite in every way. And so we've heard she wants this bill on the floor quickly. I've heard rumors as soon as March 1st, which is crazy. And I've also heard that she doesn't want us to amend it at all. Well, we'll see. We'll go ahead and use our, independent branch of government powers there, if at all possible. And I imagine we'll have lots of things to do with amending it, including adding back in collective bargaining, things with regard to wages, all of that kind of stuff. We have plenty to say, I'm sure. So that bill is coming up. So there are probably other bills to freak out about outside of the scope of education, but so many of them right now are in the education sphere that I'm going to go to that bucket now, if you will. There are many bills out there that limit or in other ways put handcuffs on the ability of teachers to do their jobs in the classroom. And many of these bills punch down on LGBTQ kids. Many of these bills are simply mean, and none of them come from a real problem that they're trying to solve. They're all part of a national playbook that is frankly just part of what Republicans are doing in the far right sphere to try to get more national play and national pats on the back from national Republican groups. So one of them is it's been colloquially called "Don't Say Gay." In Florida, there's a "Don't Say Gay" bill. I would probably call this "Don't Say Gay" on steroids. It is a bill that does not allow classrooms to talk about gender identity in any way. Which, I mean, if I had a theme of this session, it would be unintended consequences. And maybe they're intended, I don't know. But there are concerns with the way you read the bill, not the way Representative Wheeler and Speaker Grassley talk about it, but the way you read the bill that make it clear that a teacher could be at risk if she puts up a picture from her wedding to her spouse. A kid could be essentially erased in the classroom from talking about his own family. Kids who are, and that's just about families, let alone kids who are, who recognize that they might be gay or bisexual or in any way non-cis, straight, heterosexual people. These kids are in many ways erased. Their realities, their experiences are not recognized or acknowledged in the classroom. There's also a forced outing bill that's out there that would require, not allow, but require that educators share the fact that a student has asked to be called pronouns different from those they were born with their parents. You can imagine why this would be a terrible piece of legislation. It is dangerous for kids, and it takes away another safe space for kids who maybe aren't ready to tell their parents, but want to be acknowledged and recognized as who they are at school. There is also a nickname. I don't know if it's the same bill or if it's in the governor's bill. The governor's bill also, the governor's education bill includes a lot of these components as well. So it's kind of just all a mishmash. But There's another one that doesn't allow for nicknames in the classroom. You have to have express permission from your parents to use a nickname in the classroom. That means Governor Reynolds would not be able to go by Kim unless her parents sent in a note saying she's allowed to be Kim. I wouldn't have been able to be Jenny, unless my parents sent in a note. Again, unintended consequences here. So those are a couple pieces of legislation that truly do, or a few pieces of legislation that truly do get at the heart of what we see as a national goal here, which is to erase LGBTQ kids from the classroom and the LGBTQ experience from any world in which our kids are interacting. And what's incredibly frustrating to me is that there is not a problem they're trying to solve here, right? There is not an overwhelming, amount of this material that's taught in the classroom. In fact, none of it is in ways that are not age appropriate. But the damage that can be done by erasing these conversations in the classroom and making it, putting a muzzle on teachers is truly extraordinary, the damage that could be done. And so, this legislation is all very hateful, mean, and again, not really focused on solving a problem. We know that we're getting to the Republicans because Representative Wheeler and Speaker Grassley have been adamant in what this legislation does not do. And they also even did it on the Education Committee, from what I understand, and Representative Levin can talk with you about that. But they're denying that it does exactly what the plain text reading of the bill does. And so there was one time when one of the representatives was incredibly incredulous about our assertion that, for instance, someone couldn't put a picture of their spouse on their desk. And we asked where in the bill they were protected from that. And they were unable to point it out to us, but said no one would enforce that. Well, all evidence to the contrary in the way our state is handling things right now, especially at the Department of Education, which, breaking news, Ann Lebo, the Department of Ed director, stepped down on Friday, and now she's stepping down on Friday. And March 15th is her last day, or March 14th. And this government reorg bill could be signed into law before that happens even. So we'll see what the impact is there. There also is a lot of talk up at the Capitol about banning books. We've been asked to not use the phrase banning books by Republicans. I think we can imagine why they've asked us not to use that phrase, but just because we don't want to call it that doesn't mean it's not true. And so, as you know, maybe the governor's education bill includes a large a provision that says that there should be a list kept at the Department of Education on what bills have been banned in certain libraries or classrooms, and then every school in the state is required to ban that book as well in their district. We also know that they want to limit the kind of books that are being taught in the classroom, and those are overwhelmingly by authors of color, authors who identify as LGBTQ, or other or international authors. And so we know what we're trying to do here as well with regard to marginalizing and erasing. And then finally, there's been some shenanigans in the Government Oversight Committee, as per usual this year. The Government Oversight Committee announced with our ranking member, Representative James, who is our House Minority Whip and is amazing, said, much like Eleanor Levin and Adam Zabner are amazing. She said she found out on the Thursday before a Monday public hearing that they would be inviting, that Brooke Bowden, the chair of the committee, would be inviting some parents who were very upset about the fact that they tried to get books banned in their schools and were not able to. Well, come to find out that when Representative James asked them some questions at a public hearing at which our side or the other side was not allowed to be present, it was just the speakers that Representative Bowden had invited, none of ours, none of the other side. 4 of the 5 did not follow the process that's already in place to get that book banned if they wanted to. And so these people, they were all Moms for Liberty members, so they're all part of an activist group, and they all stepped forward to say, I wanted this book banned, and it was not banned. And 4 of the 5 did not follow the already existing process to get a book considered, which should tell you all that you need to know. So at the committee, at the hearing, Representative James asked Representative Bowden if she would commit to inviting the other side to come talk. And that's tomorrow. So they set a public hearing for February 20th, which is tomorrow. That hearing we were not, as Democrats, we're not allowed to add names to the list or invite anyone. It is only representatives of the administration of the schools where those moms had tried to get the books banned. And so as you can see what they're doing, they're setting up an us versus them kind of debate without any parental input whatsoever from parents who would prefer not to have books banned, because I would rather that Moms for Liberty not be the group choosing which books my kids get to read. And many kids across many families across the state feel the same. So we're having our own little event at 4 o'clock tomorrow. It is on Facebook Live. And so you can go to my Facebook page or the Iowa House Democrats, and you can see the invite link. It'll be at 4 o'clock on Facebook Live, and then also at the Capitol at 4 o'clock if folks are inclined to head this way. But both of those are ways to participate in the pre-hearing, where we hear from parents about why it's okay for me to tell my kids what books not to read. It's okay for you to decide what books your kids don't read. It is not okay, however, for me to tell your kids what books they can and cannot read, and vice versa. The only other thing about this book banning nonsense that we've been hearing is that another of the books that were mentioned, none but one were required reading as part of an assignment. And the one that was required, there was an alternative provided ahead of time. So once again, these are Republican solutions in search of a problem. So these are sort of some of the bills that we've been fighting against and dealing with. And that doesn't even begin to talk about some of the things that have been, advanced through the Senate or introduced in the House. We heard that Representative Stoltenberg from Scott County would like to introduce an all-out abortion ban in the state. We have yet to see whether or not we'll consider the constitutional amendment to ban abortion this year or next. As you'll remember, it needs to pass this year's session or next in order to appear on the 2024 ballot. Don't tell anyone, but I would love it if that amendment appeared on the 2024 ballot, because it is incredibly unpopular and it would drive a bunch of our people out to vote. So we'll see if they can help themselves and not introduce that amendment. I don't think they can. So I'm trying to think of other things. Those are the ones that we just talked about. Property taxes. So at the beginning of session, we heard a lot of talk about property taxes, a lot of talk about how that was going to be the next thing that Republicans dealt with in the legislature, was lowering property taxes. Well, they got a little hiccup along the way because there was a 2013 tax bill, and we could go into the details here, but there was a 2013 tax bill that had a provision that expired in 2023 that there was no fix for. And so they didn't realize until halfway through the fiscal year, until October of the fiscal year, that this had happened. And so cities are now having to have money pulled back from them. It's a long story, but anyway, it was governor's mistake and the Department of Revenue's mistake that now cities are having to pay for in the middle of their budget season, actually toward the end of their budgeting process. So House Democrats said, well, if there's going to be a problem that needs fixing like this, rather than hold cities and counties accountable for a mistake they didn't make and take more of their money back and make them potentially raise property taxes, why don't we take it out of the general or the taxpayer trust fund? This is exactly what it's for, right? It's about $2 billion. We can take it from there, no harm, no foul. And then cities are still whole and can continue to fund essential services like police, fire, EMT, et cetera. These things were, this amendment, of course, did not go on. And so, we were really forced into a situation where we're voting, we're choosing between property tax owners and city and counties. So was there a question? Sorry.
Speaking of that, if there are questions, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, click on reactions and just raise your hand and we'll take those questions. We've got a lot of good information from Jennifer, but I bet you've got a few questions. So go ahead and raise your digital hand if you do have a question. So
first of all, I'd like to thank Jennifer very much for that information. So yeah, we'll go ahead to questions.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I see a question there from Deb. So Deb, if you'd like to just go ahead and unmute and take it away.
There is a bill to remove transgender from the Civil Rights Act of Iowa. Is that moving or is that likely to die?
Forgot about that one. There is a bill that would remove gender identity from Iowa's Civil Rights Code. And messing with the Civil Rights Code is quite a big step. I've been pretty frustrated, frankly, with the business community's lack of involvement in a lot of this legislation. And I've told them this. I feel that they're not leading enough on this issue because it is their employees' kids who are being affected. And it's one of the biggest reasons there are workforce shortages in the state, is that people are seeing this is not a place that they want to move because of all this hateful legislation. This, however, Deb, is one that they have gotten involved in, I understand, behind the scenes. And so it may not make it, but the funnel is coming up and we'll see what happens. But that is one of the ones that I keep hearing is on the bubble with regard to it actually making it out of the funnel. And Ed, I apologize. And Emily, I didn't mean to hijack that. I know that questions were supposed to come at the end, but I thought I heard a voice. So sorry if I messed up your whole program.
Oh,
not a
no,
problem.
that's our plan.
This is good.
Okay.
So again, just head down there to reactions, click on raise your hand if you do have a question for Jennifer. So
There is a question in the chat. I've been told that Iowa City will have to miss out on lowering property taxes for the 12th year in a row because of this mistake and the fact that Representative Jacoby's amendment wasn't considered.
Yeah, and it was, we should give a shout out to Representative Jacoby. He is just he's been paying very close attention to this. And the way he puts it is apparently the governor can't count to 10, which is just always my favorite way of, that's very Dave Jacoby. We can all hear him say it. But yeah, he, the implications for cities and counties will be like this. I just spoke in Knoxville, and there's a member of the city council there who said she's having to return $300,000 of her budget. And she did not have room in her budget to cut $300,000. And Representative Kaufman on the floor did say, oh, well, Ankeny has a surplus of this much million and Urbandale has a surplus of this much million. Well, what about Iowa City? What about Coralville? What about Urbandale? What about Red Oak and Knoxville and small towns across the state? Many of which, by the way, are represented by Republicans. They're just getting gutted here because they chose to take away an option that would have really been kept the communities whole.
Hey, Jennifer, I see a question from John Green. Thanks, John, for that question. Interest in the supervisors redistricting House Bill 281.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about that, John. Sorry, I completely understand why you're interested in that bill. But I can find out a little bit during Zach's remarks and come back to you and talk with you about it. I don't know where it is or what's happened with it, but I can look into that one. I haven't heard much about it, which probably means it won't happen, but we'll see. Oh, Second Amendment Preservation Act. Did I see that one pop up? Yeah. That's a real bad bill. This is an absolutely terrible bill. It eliminates background checks. It makes it so that protections for domestic violence, people who have domestic violence charges, their inability to get a gun, it takes that away. It essentially says, that it's a free for all and whatever you want to do, you can do. It's not the right way to say it, but that's how I say it on a Sunday night after a lot of speeches. But it is a very bad bill, and we'll see what happens with it next. But certainly there are some, again, unintended consequences. The interesting part is that often we have some gun bills that are scheduled to come up, and they seem to understand that politically it's bad to do those on a day when there's a shooting. And unfortunately, they have been unable to find a day where we can talk about that because there are shootings so frequently. And that should tell them all they need to know, frankly. I see my partner in crime, partner in good has joined us, so I can answer more questions with Zach later, or I can keep going and eat into Zach's time.
Yeah, let's move ahead to Zach Walls, and if you are willing to stay around for more questions later, that would be wonderful.
You bet. Thanks for having me, everyone.
Thank you. Take it away, Zach.
Well, good evening, everybody. Sorry, I'm running a little behind. I had to drive into Des Moines because we've got a big day here at the State House tomorrow. Apparently, I was told apparently tomorrow's a holiday for some people. That was news to me. It's not a state holiday here at the legislature. So Jennifer and I will be in session working tomorrow. But obviously, if she's covered the ground of what's the bad bills that have been going through the House, unfortunately, that means she's probably covered a lot of the bad bills that are going through the Senate. Republicans this year have been much more consistent working through both the House and Senate than they have been in years past, where there's been a lot more conflict, frankly, between the House and Senate caucuses. This year, they've done a much better job of working together to pass really bad legislation. And so we've already seen several things pass, including obviously the top ticket item was the Republican voucher plan, which is going to pose, I think, frankly, a pretty existential threat to Iowa's public education system. And one of the things that came up this afternoon, I was over in Cedar County, and I think I see some of our Cedar County friends on the Zoom tonight as well. One of the things that we talked about briefly while we were in Tipton that I think is really relevant to this kind of broader conversation is the effect that the vouchers bill is going to have on our democracy. And what I mean by that is the role of public education in our state and across the country for so many years has really been to provide the bedrock of an informed lowercase d democratic citizenry that can elect political leaders and governmental officials. And I really worry that without a strong, unified public education system, the divisions and the fissures that have already emerged in our state and in our country are really going to deepen that division even further. And that's going to make a lot of the challenges that we're currently facing worse and not better. Going forward, rather than just throwing up our hands and kind of saying, woe is me, I know that Representative Levin is going to be giving a presentation on what you can do about it, which I think is great. But I think from the legislative perspective, specifically on the voucher bill, the number one thing that we're going to have to be doing is providing oversight and accountability. The legislation as it was passed did not include nearly strong enough mechanisms for either of those things. And so it'll really be up to us to make sure that we're working with our friends and supporters across the state to keep a very close eye on what's happening. Because these private schools are going to lack the public oversight that we have in our public education system. That's the whole point of the school board, is a democratically elected group of people from the community who can provide that oversight and leadership. And I'm really concerned about what we're going to see when we don't have that oversight and accountability and transparency. I know that's something that Auditor Rob Sand is already talking about, something that we'll certainly be working closely with him in that regard. In terms of what's coming down the pike, I don't know, Jennifer, did you get into the governor's reorg bill much?
I don't know about how much, but I talked about salary schedule. I talked about at the pledge of the governor, appointments being ripped off, and power grab.
Yeah, so the governor's reorganization bill, it's the first time in there was a reorg bill in the early part of the 2000s, but this is a much more comprehensive version of that. The governor paid $1 million to get this report from some consultants from Washington, D.C., who came out to Iowa and had a bunch of meetings. I shouldn't say $1 million, it was only $994,000. And they had these meetings all over the state government, but they completely ignored to actually involving the legislative branch. And by the way, this is not just me complaining as a Democrat. Republican legislators weren't involved in any of this process either. And so the concern that we have when we say that this is a power grab, by the executive branch, this is not just a Republican, issue. There's the Republican legislators weren't involved either. Very publicly, I think Republican leaders are saying that, they certainly plan to pass this bill. But privately, I think there's a little bit more skepticism about this 1,600 page piece of legislation that the governor drafted essentially in secret, without involving the public, without involving legislators. But this is going to be a really big deal. It's going to affect lots of different constituencies. And I'll give you just one small example of how failing to involve the public and failing to involve the legislature in the drafting of this legislation is going to hurt Iowans. Just last week, we had a subcommittee hearing on the governor's reorganization bill, specifically about how the Department of the Blind is being moved within state government and how that's going to affect Iowans who receive those services, who are educated at the School of the Blind and Deaf. And when Republicans held that subcommittee hearing, they didn't even think to provide accessibility for folks who might be visually impaired and would need those services. And it's just a perfect illustration of how the Republican kind of closed-minded perspective on diversity and accessibility is translating into public policy, a public policy process that is really going to affect many, many Iowans in very negative ways. And I don't want to belabor the point, but I mean, this is like literally the whole reason why we have government, right? Is to help provide for people who need additional assistance or special supports. And that's like the whole point of elected representation. So I could go on and on and on about that, but that's going to be a thing to keep an eye on. There are going to be many more subcommittee meetings. I believe, Jennifer, the House is meeting every day this week on the governor's reorg bill. We've already had a couple of subcommittees in the Senate. We're going to have a couple more. So just stay tuned for those because this is going to be a really big deal. That's going to affect a lot of people. So I'm happy, Ed, to take some questions, but between what we've seen already, I think this is a big thing that's looming out there. We could probably get into some of the property tax stuff as well if there's interest in that, but unfortunately, that's just so up in the air. I think it's hard to speculate with much certainty about what we're going to see.
Yeah, I see we have a question. Go ahead, Kieran.
Hi, Zach. I'm wondering, it just sounds like it's universally bad. And so, I just wonder, where do we focus our resources? What priorities do you have for us? I mean, how do we distinguish one bad bill from another?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kieran. So for those of you who have Republican senator or representative, I presume that Eleanor will be talking about this in her presentation. Certainly making sure to stay in touch with them to express your concerns about various pieces of legislation. That's super important. For us on the Democratic side, frankly, we're not the problem, so to speak. We're out here fighting the good fight, but Republicans really do need to hear from their constituents. In terms of what we can be doing, and I'm looking forward to seeing Eleanor's presentation. I think that there's a lot that we can be doing. We have a newly elected chair for the Iowa Democratic Party, Rita Hart, who I know is already at work completely rebuilding, root and branch from top to bottom the entire IDP structure. I'm really excited to see what she's able to do, coming from her background as a state senator who won very tough races in her competitive seat. So at some point in the relatively near future, I expect we're going to hear from Rita kind of what she's asking for us to do at the county level in Johnson County and kind of our surrounding areas. So I think making sure that we're ready to put our shoulder to the stone when we get to that point is the one thing that comes immediately to mind. Because, obviously things have to change. The way that we've been doing things isn't working. And so we have to have a completely new strategy for engaging our fellow Democrats, engaging independents, engaging Republicans, and figuring out how we can get our state back on track. Because if we don't get focused on winning tough elections soon, we're going to be in a world of hurt, and this is just going to be the beginning. Not to put too fine a point on it.
Hey, thanks a lot, Kieran. We'll go to Deb, and then we'll go to Jennifer.
So on this government merging bill, was wondering if you were aware that the departments have already started merging despite the bill not passing yet.
Yep.
And is this legal, that they can already take the actions without the bill having been passed?
Yeah, so the governor, this has been most the case in the Department of Health and Human Services about 2 years ago. DHS and IDPH began the process. So the Department of Human Services and the Department of Public Health began the process of merging a lot of their integrations. It is legal. A lot of what you're seeing when we change the code is changing references to different department structures and what have you. Now, there are some parts that require statutory changes. So, for example, the governor changes many of the department heads to be able to serve at the pleasure of the governor. That requires a code change. But a lot of the basic kind of blocking and tackling in terms of merging different departments and what have you, that is already happening. And what's being changed in the law is changing references to where those things exist within the code as it currently exists, which is part of why it's such a long bill.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Deb. If we have any other questions for Zach or Jennifer, feel free to ask those. So go ahead, Richard, with your question.
Hey, Richard, you're still on mute.
Hello?
There
Yeah,
you go.
there you
We can
go.
hear you just fine. Go ahead.
All right, my name is Richard Scherz. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I live in Coralville, and I just have 3 areas of concern and of interest, and was just wondering what, if any, legislation is proposed or might be proposed in three areas. And I just moved back from the state about a year ago from Arizona, but I grew up in Iowa and in Des Moines, graduating from Drake and law school at University of Iowa. What the 3 areas I have are, does the Democrats in the legislature, do you have any particular legislation directly focused of Iowa farmers? That's number 1, something that could improve their quality of life. I understand they've reading the news, fertilizer problems, shortages, et cetera. But do you have any specific proposals just directed to Iowa farmers? Secondly, I understand the controversy concerning vouchers and these other schools, but from a broader perspective, my second question is, has the Democratic Party, and I've been away, and I haven't asked anybody about this, but has the Democratic Party recently or promoted or proposed a constitutional amendment to the Iowa Constitution, creating a right for parents to public education? I understand that's a question. There's a Iowa Supreme Court opinion, King versus State, and they discussed this, but there's doubt. But I understand California has such a constitutional amendment. That's my second question. And if third is reading the news recently in the past several weeks, there was a large article in the Des Moines Register about 300,000 Iowans not getting an adequate diet, not getting sufficient food on a weekly basis. And these are areas that I'm describing, which the Republican Party potentially and practically speaking probably are vulnerable. But that's my third area. Does the Democratic Party and the legislature have any particular legislation focused not upon marijuana, which I think is a mistake to propose that, adjacent to schools, public schools, which is in the People Over Politics brochure or ad that's being promoted? I think that's a mistake to put those together or even to promote marijuana. I don't think that plays well in rural Iowa or the farm Iowa.
Hey, Richard, thanks for those questions.
Yeah,
I
those are
went
the
ahead and
3
brought
areas.
Jennifer. I went ahead and brought
Those are
Jennifer
3
in
areas.
so
Thank
she
you.
could answer.
All
They
right,
both
thank you.
could answer those questions. So go
Yeah,
ahead.
so Richard, welcome back to Iowa and welcome back to Coralville. Good to have you. A couple quick things. So first of all, I don't off the top of my head have a specific, rural farmers agenda in terms of what are the proactive things that the Senate Democratic Caucus is introducing. I was a part of a working group over the last 2 years that was focused on soil health and opportunities for state government to provide some real resources to farmers who are interested in kind of soil health initiatives. That culminated in some legislation that was introduced that Republicans promptly put on a shelf and went nowhere. I would say most of the work that's happening from the Democratic side on agriculture-focused things is really happening through the USDA. Secretary Vilsack speaks with Representative Converse and I on probably a monthly basis. A lot of the initiatives that are running through his department over there are having some really profound impacts on the way that farmers shape their agricultural practices. They've really improved a lot of the cost share for programs that are benefiting carbon sequestration through better practices, no-till, cover crops, et cetera. That role generally goes through the federal government, not through state government. Most of the crop insurance programs and cost share happens at the federal level, not at the state level. Your second question, in terms of, what are we seeing? Rich, actually, I don't know if I actually remember what exactly your second question was.
Hunger, about Was it about 300,000 Iowans who are hungry?
Oh, this is the SNAP piece. Yeah, I mean, look, the Republican proposals to SNAP were actually probably the most anti-farmer legislation that we've seen introduced this session, specifically as to, the fact that they were excluding, dairy and meat products, which just goes to show that Republicans are basically copy and pasting their agenda from other states, not actually thinking for themselves. And once Democrats pointed that out, they changed that. I certainly expect that they will put some pretty strict changes through, and that'll be really negative when that goes through. To the final piece, look, when you go out and you talk to Iowans, and I understand your concern about rural, what have you. There's really not an urban-rural split on the issue of cannabis legalization. People have different feelings about it. Obviously, you just expressed a different perspective. But there has been legislation introduced in both chambers. Again, Republicans haven't advanced it, but that's definitely something that a strong majority of Iowans support. Representative Conference developed the People Over Politics, so she can speak to some of that.
Yeah, I can talk about that for a minute. So thanks for your feedback, Richard. I will tell you that of our 4 things in our People Over Politics initiative, everything on there is supported by 55% or more of Iowans. And we polled across the state in 2022, and in 3 legislative districts that were carried by Trump in 2020, legalization of marijuana was 70%, 73%, and 58% favorable. And so it is in suburbs, small towns, rural areas, and across the state. It is incredibly popular, primarily because of 3 reasons. 1, as people are tired of seeing tax revenue go to the states around us. 2, Iowans are already using a product and they want to make sure that it's safe. And 3, Iowans want to address the overwhelming disparities in incarceration with regard to low-level drug offenses. So that's the reason we included it in there. Everything in our plan is research-based. So it's all based on data, and it's not just Democratic polling. The Seltzer poll showed it at 55% in 2021. That's gone up 25% in 9 years. So with regard to marijuana legalization, that's where that's coming from. It also is among 55% of people polled in 2022. 55% of people polled said it would be a motivating factor to vote for Democrats. So it has been shown. We heard from pollsters on both sides who said that if you're not talking about this issue, you're missing an opportunity to get rural voters. So the other question that we heard was regarding and this was a question before Richard, but regarding what we can do, what things we can do. And I would like to say that we are doing a lot of work now. For both Zach and I, the campaign started on November 10th. The campaign for 2024 started on November 10th. I can tell you that the people who are in vulnerable districts in the state, we lost 14 districts by fewer than 1,500 votes. And so we're targeting districts across the state that we have vulnerable Republicans. In almost all of them, they voted for vouchers. And so right now, if you lived in those districts, you would be seeing Facebook ads that show them giving, for example, $10 million to Dowling, courtesy of the students in Johnston High School, and tying Republicans to their vote and holding them accountable. My 2 words for 2023 are intentional and accountable. We can't afford to do anything that we don't know why we're doing it, and campaign wise and life wise, I guess. And then accountable, we're going to hold them accountable nonstop. So, we don't say this outwardly, but we like to talk about the change that happens to Republicans from the doors to the floor. They knock on your door and they say one thing, and they get to the Capitol and they do a completely different thing. We know there was a candidate for House, is a Republican, who knocked on doors and said he was pro-choice and just flat out lied. And he's not. And we have him on the record. So we're trying to hold them accountable now so that when they do start to lie in the election season, we've undermined them, or we've undercut that a little bit. So I just wanted to go back to that question too.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think, Emily, you've got some questions.
Yeah, there's a question in this chat. What is the status of Senate Study Bill 1105 and HR 3? I'm very worried about the hoops being created for families to qualify for SNAP and the loss of automatic free meal of eligibility through direct certification for students whose families lose benefits. This study bill includes 8 references to needing a third-party vendor in order to manage the changes, which of course means more costs.
Yeah, it's I spoke briefly to this in my response to Richard's question a moment ago. This is legislation that is, again, this is copy paste from across the country. Republicans introduced it here in Iowa. One of the things that really stands out, and Diane gets at it a little bit in the question, is the reality that under the current proposal, the estimate from the state government is that it will actually cost more to administer that oversight than it will save in benefits that are paid out. I want to be really clear, to the extent that there's waste, fraud, abuse in the system, it needs to be found, it needs to be rooted out. But we also need to be really clear-eyed about what are we actually trying to accomplish here. If what we're trying to accomplish with an additional oversight program is savings of taxpayer dollars, then this is the wrong thing to do. It will actually cost us more money than it saves. And so to the extent that that's the justification, I think it's really important to be really clear about the facts. The second thing that I think doesn't make any sense, but that the SNAP bill, the specific, one of the new things that it will create, although I don't believe that the federal government will allow this to happen, but Joe Biden won't be president forever. One of the things that will happen is that it will create essentially an asset limitation test. So if you are a two-parent household and you have a family of four, and one of the two parents is not currently working, but is responsible for part of household activities, and then another parent is laid off, but both parents have a car, that family basically would not qualify for food assistance. And so the likelihood of those kids going hungry because of that new asset limitation goes very, very high. If you have savings for college, for retirement that you don't want to touch while you're looking for another job, you would have to draw those down before you qualify for this assistance. And so it really doesn't make any sense. The whole point of food assistance is to help people buy groceries at the time when they need it while they're trying to get back on their feet. And unfortunately, the proposal that Republicans are putting forward would just fundamentally change that program, and as we know it here in the state of Iowa. So I think it is a little too soon, Diane, to say what the final version of the bill is that will pass, but I have very little doubt that they will pass something this year.
Yeah, I mean, they've removed the list of things from all the, Zach, if you said this, I might have been distracted by a cat. They've removed the list of all things, except now they just want it to be candy and soda that you cannot buy with SNAP benefits. And again, as you mentioned, Zach, it'll cost more to administer it, and the savings aren't there. So really, it's just about being mean and punching down. Punching down is a big theme this session too.
Joe Barry had a good question that we almost overlooked. Can you comment on the bill requiring schools to provide education on gun use that uses an NRA sponsored program?
I can. I meant to flag that. I'm sorry. I saw that, Joe. So Representative Akeo Abdul Samad and Representative Winchittle have introduced legislation for gun safety classes in the classroom for very different reasons. One of them would like it because he wants everyone to know how to use a gun. The other one because if we're going to make guns so accessible, we want to at least teach kids how to use it. Representative Akeo Abdul Samad found out that was NRA approved language, and has now amended it to be Moms Demand Action, or I think it's either them or it's Gifford's curriculum instead. I don't believe it'll go anywhere anyway, but when he learned that it was NRA language, he switched it out with some Moms Demand Action or Gifford's curriculum on gun safety.
So we've got another question in the chat, Eleanor Levin, and it's, Eileen Barron. If you have time, anything to watch for concerning the large healthcare bill? Seems to have bipartisan support, but funds crisis pregnancy centers.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we have a problem with, right? On our side is the crisis pregnancy proponent of the mom's bill. I imagine if it comes to the floor like it is, you'll see amendments from us to remove that part of the bill. It is it is cynical. It is a way to get us to fund crisis pregnancy centers because we want over-the-counter birth control. There's also a lot of inconsistency here with the governor's office and her administration and other electeds in the state, while the attorney general is sending a letter saying that nothing should be available through the mail with regard to reproductive health care. The governor is saying we should be able to have over-the-counter and mail-in birth control. So I'm not sure the left hand knows what the right hand's doing, but with regard to our concern, bipartisan support for some components of the bill, but I don't remember what happened in committee. They came and talked to me during committee about what they were going to do. I don't think we had any yeses, but I'm not sure.
I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I have a quick one. Of the punching down and trying to erase LGBTQ plus, and especially kids, which bills should we be the most concerned about passing in the near term? So that we, which bills should we actually be trying to contact legislators about in that area?
I think the number one thing would be trying to amend the governor's omnibus bill. I don't know if it was a week or 2 weeks ago, she introduced a bill that essentially rolled up a bunch of the worst hits of what Republicans had introduced individually over the first 2 weeks of session. And the governor's omnibus contains several different provisions, but includes several of the kind of don't say gay, don't say trans, book banning. It's where there's the language about if one school district bans a book, then it goes on this list that goes out statewide for books that should be banned. That's, I'd say the number one thing is be trying to amend that before that moves to the floor. Once it's on the floor, I don't think there'll be any floor amendments, but I could very well see it being amended in committee.
Yeah, I would just say that since, as Zach said, I said earlier, they're all thrown into this governor's bill too. It's watching both, paying very close attention to both. We have also been collecting, I think you might remember that during the voucher debate, we went to, we put out alerts to get folks to email their legislators, and Zach and I pretty joyfully celebrated when the legislative server crashed the day we debated vouchers. And if nothing else, it was a slight moral victory. 11,000 people signed our petition in 24 hours. And with these punching down bills, we're asking Iowans to send in messages of support and welcome to LGBTQ kids in the state. We've been working hard on making them feel welcome, since we don't want the message to be that their government and their state doesn't welcome them here. So if you want, I can try to find the link for that and put that in there, but it's also an action item. It doesn't stop the bill. There are plenty of ways to stop the bill. Contact your legislators, even if we agree with you, because it helps us on the floor. But if you have a legislator who is not on our side on this one, definitely contact them, because their most famous line, I don't know if they do this in the Senate, Zach, is, well, I haven't heard from anybody on it. I mean, it's not true, but I hear a lot of people say, well, I don't write because it doesn't matter. I can't believe anyone in this group says that, but I think that we don't want to give them that out. So yeah.
Okay, before we go to Deb again, Emily, you want to get those other two questions in the chat?
Sure. Are Democrats in the legislature, this is from Sonia Ettender, are Democrats in the legislature going to work to prevent the carbon pipelines tearing up Iowa soil? It's not reversible, to say the least.
Well, there was just a bill introduced in the House from Stephen Holt on Thursday that we're looking at right now and wanting to see what we can do with that bill. We have a lot of questions about this bill and about this issue, and want to make sure that what happens is actually going to move the needle and make a difference. And so we're a little skeptical that Stephen Holt's legislation will do that. So we've got a few bills, I think, that we've been drafting, folks have been drafting, and I don't know that they're filed yet. They have to be filed this week, I think. But I don't know where we are in terms of those actual pieces going, but we've been focused since Thursday on the Holt bill. I don't know about you, Zach. It's going through judiciary over here.
Yeah, I mean, Republicans haven't let there's been several bills introduced in the Senate that have gotten bipartisan support, including from Democrats, that Republicans are not letting advance. And so in terms of what are Democrats able to do, we don't get to decide which bills advance and which bills don't. That's obviously what the Republicans control, being in a supermajority. So they have the ability to make those decisions. I think that there is certainly the opportunity to collaborate and work together on this issue. But with the Republican, leadership being where it is, that opportunity just hasn't been there. So I think it's just too soon to say how that'll shake out. I saw that there was that big bill introduced over in the House. There has not been a companion introduced in the Senate. So I think it's just too soon to say what's actually going to happen there. And Dan, to your next question about legislation to start addressing Iowa's polluted waters, certainly not while Republicans have the majority.
There is Representative Levin also mentioned a suite of bills from Representative Jennery. I think that That's true too. And again, that's a great example of that. The reason that we're focused on this Holt bill is because it's the only one that seems to have any movement. When a Republican introduces bills and they don't go anywhere either, we just got to pay attention to the ones that actually seem to be moving. And so that's why we're focused on this Holt bill to see what it's really going to do. I got a message sent to me that said, what's the status of the effort to repeal gender balance on boards? Zach, that's on your side right now, right?
I just don't have an update on that one.
Okay.
Joanna Sinwell is asking in the chat, could you speak to bills that improve mental health services and accessibility in the state?
I mean, it'd be great if there were some. You know, we've been pretty frustrated for a while about no bills to address mental health. We've introduced plenty and believe that this is an issue that's being completely ignored by the Republican majority. And they like to talk about it. They like to talk about how they fixed mental health in the state. I don't know about you, but I was trying to get my son in to see someone in January, and the next appointment was available in August for the person he needed to see, a specialist with mental health. So providers aren't here. There have been a couple bills about loan repayment for providers, but not nearly enough. Going on with regard to mental health in the state, at least on the House side, other than making Iowans' mental health worse by punching down on them and making them feel marginalized.
It's a really important question, Joanna. I saw a pretty troubling story over the weekend in the New York Times about this big CDC study on mental health for particularly adolescent girls and LGBTQ kids. I was really troubled by the statistics that were in that study. Obviously, I haven't had the chance to read the study itself, and so I'd be interested to dig into some of the findings there. But I think it just speaks to the current mental health crisis that we have in this country. You know, Iowa is not unique in that regard. You know, and so I think obviously there's a lot of work to do here in Iowa. You know, there was this framework created for a children's mental health system several years ago, but Republicans never actually funded it. And as a result, you know, that there's some work that has happened, but I don't know if you could really speak to expansion in service providers or anything like that specifically for kids. I think the other challenge that goes hand in hand with the fact that a lot of providers don't want to practice in a state that is seen as being so anti-LGBTQ from a public policy perspective. Those things go hand in hand, and unfortunately it creates this feedback loop that makes it worse, not better. And so I think that there's some compounding things there. The number one thing that we could do would obviously to be turn on a dedicated stream of funding for that mental health system. The second thing would be just to stop fanning the flames of the culture war and actually focus on the issues that affect everyday Iowans.
Let's go back to Deb for one more question there, and then I think we probably should move on. So go ahead, Deb.
All right, there is a bill to exempt from state income taxes people who provide Medicaid waiver services. I think that's a great bill, except that it only allows income from nonprofit employers. And in rural areas, oftentimes they have to hire their own people through the consumer choice option. So since they're not employed by a nonprofit, those workers would be not included, would not be eligible for the tax exemption. And I think that's a huge disservice to rural areas where we just don't have the big companies providing the services.
Look out, keep an eye out for that one. You said it's in the House or the Senate, Deb?
I don't recall. It's been a bit since I found it. So not a lot of noise being made on that one, huh?
I agree. No, I agree, Eleanor. I mean, you know, the children's mental health system, which Representative Masher put a ton of time and effort into bringing into being, it's really, I don't want to be as bold as to say it's a slap in the face to her and the work that so many others have done with regard to creating the system, but creating the system and then walking away from it with no funding and no ability to actually implement it is cynical at best, right? Because now they have folks walking around saying that they fixed mental health in the state. And as Zach said, if you haven't funded it, it's not doing any good. Telehealth services, you know, continue to be, there are some barriers there with regard to mental health. We created an org chart, created a system, and Representative Masher laid out a roadmap that is so much more robust and so much more impactful in terms of actually changing lives. And nothing's been done on that front. So it's pretty frustrating. As a faculty member at a university where I see a bunch of 20 and 21-year-olds, I'm seeing really the heart of Iowa's mental health crisis every day, as many of us are.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jean Bancroft to take it from here. Take it away, Jean.
Okay. Thank you both, Jennifer and Zach, for giving us plenty to be concerned about, to freak out about. The one thing is that as you follow the legislature, you do get very concerned as a citizen. And I can't tell you enough what it means to hear it straight from you, your perspective. So thanks for your time. And now we're going to see if we can get some ideas of what to do about it, right? So I have the honor of introducing Representative Eleanor Levin from District 89. She and I share a love of education. When we met, we knew that we were both teachers for a long time and that we both wanted to advocate for education. She's been a public school ELA teacher and a private writing tutor since she graduated from Cornell College in Mount Vernon. She has volunteered on the boards of Iowa City Community Theater, the League of Women Voters of Johnson County, South District Neighborhood Association, and then she was elected in November 2023 to represent South and West Iowa City and residential University Heights. She's passionate about ensuring that young people see a future for themselves and feel welcome in Iowa. She's a teacher. She is, whoops, can't even read my own writing. She's a teacher and a proud aunt to many amazing kids, a military spouse, and an animal lover. She chose Iowa as a place to live. She moved here to live. And that's why I think it's so exciting that she's now serving us in the legislature to make this a place where young people like her want to come and live. So thank you so much, Eleanor, for being here tonight and for working on our behalf.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Jean, for that overwhelming introduction. When asked whether I would be willing to do this section, I felt a little bit unequal to the task. But then I realized that since long before I threw my hat in the ring to run for this seat, I have been trying to help people better advocate for themselves and trying to help people better connect with and follow what's happening at the legislature. And I really feel like the framing of tonight is well taken, because the pace of what we're seeing is so overwhelming, can be so overwhelming. And the tools we have available to us to follow what's happening and feel like we're staying on top of it and doing our part to advocate are challenging to utilize at best. And so I'm starting from the assumption that most of the folks that are joining us here this evening are already familiar with doing some of the basic things that we talk about, reaching out to your own legislators. So I'm going to actually go a little bit beyond that and talk about just some tips and tricks to make your advocacy most effective it can be. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Here we go. So I'm going to start here with 2 slides, and then I'm going to take us over to the actual legislature website for just a few minutes. The first thing I want to talk about is kind of divided these out into what do I do about it quietly and what do I do about it loudly. So of course, the primary thing that I hope you are all doing is contacting your legislators. And you can do that via email, via phone, via mail. You can contact us on topics you support and topics you oppose. It is often incredibly helpful to find out what people in our districts are thinking, whether it's in opposition or in support of a particular piece of legislation. Sometimes I don't realize that there's someone in my district who has a particular investment in where a bill goes. And so it's really helpful to hear from that person. Now, of course, we start with contacting our own representatives, but the best places to make your voice heard is by contacting subcommittee members. I don't know how many of you get Senator Weiner's newsletter, but she had a great feature in her newsletter this week that kind of laid out the subcommittee, committee, and floor debate system of how the system that our legislation goes through. The subcommittee level is where the public comment happens. Okay, so that's where you have the opportunity to make public comments online prior to a subcommittee meeting, or to actually show up and speak at a subcommittee meeting at the Capitol. You can also view those subcommittee meetings online, but at present, we do not, in either the Senate or the House, I believe, allow the availability for people to make comments in subcommittee via Zoom. Once a bill has progressed past the subcommittee, it then goes to the full committee. The subcommittee is usually 3 people. On a particularly large bill, it might be 5, or even on the reorganization bill, I believe we have 7 in the House on the subcommittee. Once it has cleared that subcommittee, it progresses to the full committee. And that's another great opportunity to take the comments that you sent to the subcommittee and say, you know, full committee, I understand you are getting ready to consider this bill. Please take my thoughts into consideration. The other thing that I suggest to people is, if you already have reached out to your legislators, if you live in my district and you already know that we've talked and I know how you feel about a bill, but you maybe grew up in a different area, or you have grandkids who go to school in a school district represented by someone else, or you own farm property interest or own any kind of property interest in another district, or if you, chose to leave an area where you used to live, or where you went to school, or had some part of your life, those can be really good opportunities to reach out to a legislator who might not otherwise be hearing from your perspective. It's really helpful to start out an email or a message with that connection, starting out by saying, I'm reaching out to you because I own property in your district, or starting out by saying, I'm reaching out to you because I grew up in the school district that you represent, is going to be an automatic assist in getting those legislators to pay more attention to what you have to say. Be direct in your communications and include personal connections to the topic, as well as logical reasoning. Now, I say that because we sometimes see emails that come in where 159 or 149 people or 150 people have been CC'd. We all see that it went to all of us. The email is all in all caps. These are incredibly emotional issues to some of us that we're writing in about. But the fact is that we get so many emails, and when they come in with that feeling that the email is screaming at us, I know certain legislators who will just not even read those. And so giving your personal connections, but then also providing your logical reasoning for why you support or don't support a piece of legislation, keeping it brief, 2 to 3 paragraphs, is really powerful in getting legislators to actually fully read what you have to say. I would say you should expect a response, particularly from your legislators. Now, the more people you reach out to, the fewer you're going to hear back from, particularly on those ones where we see that someone has done a reply all, has CC'd all 150 of us. Not a lot of folks are taking the time or have the time to respond to every single one of those, because we do get a lot of them. But you should expect a response when you reach out to someone directly, particularly to your own legislators. One thing I also suggest that people do, if you're reaching out to a subcommittee member, feel free to CC your legislator so that we know that that was passed along to them, that perspective was shared. And so that there's some accountability for whether or not they ever respond to you. Encourage your friends and family to reach out too. So I talked about this in a meeting that I was in yesterday. I asked everybody under 40 in the room to raise their hand, and it was me and one other person. Because to be quite blunt, it's not as easy for folks who are currently in their first or second jobs, currently raising, children under the age of 10, especially multiple children under the age of 10, to show up to things like this, especially the ones that happen in person. And so definitely suggest passing along the information that you gather and making it easy for the people you know to reach out to their legislators. I've kind of made a practice of looking up who people's legislators are for them and sending them the emails so that it's, they can't say, oh yeah, I need to look that up. I just do it for them. Like I said, avoid all caps paragraphs. And if you're going to send a message to all 150 of us, using BCC makes it look more like a direct message to each of us, which means you are more likely to have someone actually read your message. So that's what you can do quietly. What you can do loudly is make public comments in person, if possible, at subcommittee meetings, online if not. Some folks read the online comments, some folks do not, but we do take those into account. Attend community events, including forums, town halls. You can write letters to the editor. This is a particularly useful strategy if your representatives are not responding to you. That's a really great opportunity to write a letter to the editor and call them out. Say that you are not hearing back from your legislator. Share your legislator's social media posts and add your own thoughts and your own stories. And then also you can follow and share news outlets and op-eds you agree with. I know personally, I found a lot of value in things that come out from Iowa Starting Line. I find a lot of value in things that come out from Iowa City Press Citizen, from Daily Iowan, from the Gazette. So I really try to pay attention to what's going on with our local media. I really want to stress before I go over to look at the website that no one is expected to or has to do all of these things. So everyone should find what works for them. If you're someone who really is not comfortable with social media, but you're great at writing letters to the editor, or if you are really finding that writing handwritten letters to legislators, setting aside time once every week or once every month to write a letter to a couple of legislators about things that you're particularly concerned about, great, do that. It can also be it can be a communal event. I know some people who get together once a week and, talk about what are the things they're going to email their legislators about that week. So you can make it a group activity, and that can help to encourage others to participate. There are a couple of particular pages on the website that I wanted to direct you to. I know I just have a few minutes.
Eleanor,
Yes.
yeah. I don't know how long this part will take.
I'm hoping that it'll be like 2 minutes.
All right, we want to honor the ending.
Yes, my goal is about 2 minutes.
Okay, go.
So this is the committees and schedules chamber meetings page, and I'm going to put this link in the chat. This is a little bit hard to find, but it's a good one to bookmark because it can be hard for folks to find where and when meetings are going to be on certain bills. And so if you're following a certain bill, you can kind of check, oh, I can see for the entire week what subcommittee meetings have been scheduled. And I can scan down the list to see if a particular bill I'm concerned about is on that list. So this is a really good one to know, and I will put this link in the chat. The other one I wanted to point out is here, if you go to the publications page of the website, and come to it will bring up the LSA publications page. This is a good one to look at because you can actually come down here to subscriptions. And this is a good place where you can actually subscribe to follow certain bills, to follow committees, and to follow certain legislation. So this is another really good one to watch. And so this is another one that I will put the link in the chat. So those are just 2 pages that I found not a lot of folks are familiar with and that I find can be really helpful. That is all I had to say. So thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Eleanor. And it is helpful to see which pages on the website are especially helpful. So thank you very much. Thanks, Eleanor.
Eleanor, that was awesome. Thank you so much. I'm Roseanne Cook, and I'm one of the founders and facilitators of Potluck Insurgency. And I apologize for my voice. I have a little bit of bronchitis, so my voice is a little scratchy tonight. But listen, one of the aspects of what to do about it besides speaking out quietly or loudly in one of the many fine ways that Eleanor described, is to engage in the long game. You know, clearly we need to rebuild the Democratic Party here in Iowa. And that's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen in 2024. It's probably not going to happen in 2026. And so we've got a ways to go here. So we wanted to close out the program by talking a little bit about that. And I'm first going to turn it back over to Ed for a minute because he wanted to talk about one dimension of the long game that we're going to have going on here in Johnson County. Ed, as you probably know, is chair of the Johnson County Democrats. So he's going to talk a little bit about what they're working on, and then I'm going to come back and tell you about something else. So Ed, go ahead.
Hey, thanks a lot, Roseanne. Yeah, take a look at what we have here. Coming up on March 2nd, we have what we call our biennial organization meeting. That's where we elect new officers for our central committee. So that's going to start, you can see here at 6:30 on Thursday, March 2nd. So as soon as that election is over, we're going to go to where what I hope everyone here will join is the Johnson County Democratic Party Odd Year Caucus. And that's going to immediately follow those elections. I would guess those elections will take about a half an hour. So again, come to the Iowa City Public Library. We've got all 3 rooms, so we have quite a bit of room. But if you'd like to join by Zoom, you can just go to our website, and that's jcdems.org. If you're not getting our newsletter, we're going to post this in the newsletter on the 28th, that's Zoom. But then if you go to our, if you don't get our newsletter, go ahead and just go to jcdems.org, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and then what you're going to be able to do is just subscribe to the newsletter. Also, during that odd year caucus, we're going to start our strategic, well, we've been doing strategic planning for quite a while, but it's going to be your opportunity to hop on and join that. So we're going to break into small groups, and those groups are going to be really the way we're going to really get going with our party. Recruiting activists, voter registration and voter engagement turnout, a really central committee member engagement, communication and messaging from Johnson County, and then also advancing fundraising. So please join us, put that on your calendar for March 2nd, Iowa City Public Library, or hop on Zoom, get our newsletter to find out where that's going to be. Back to you, Roseanne.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Clearly, the Johnson County Democrats play a very important role here in Iowa, but unfortunately, we cannot do it all by ourselves. So I was very excited recently when Rita Hart was elected by the State Central Committee as the chair of the Johnson County Democrats. And I was especially excited when I read her 11-page memo that she submitted to the Central Committee outlining her plan for the IDP in Iowa. It's a wonderful plan that has great new ideas, very ambitious, clear, strategic ideas for organizing communications and fundraising in Iowa. And you can read that memo on Bleeding Heartland. And I think, Ed, you're going to throw the link in chat for us there. It was in the January.
Yeah, it's there already.
Okay, thanks. It was in the January 29th Bleeding Heartland. And I know that's a starting point. We still have Jennifer and Zach, and I hope they're going to come back in a minute because they're working. They're some of Rita's best and closest advisors right now. So I know they have some things to contribute also to the planning going forward. But I wanted to mention tonight that Rita's plan is going to cost money. If we are going to rebuild the Democratic Party here in the state, it's not going to be cheap, and we're going to have to invest in the IDP in a way that we have not for a number of years now. They need staff, folks. If they're going to do organizing and all the work that needs to be done, they've got to have staff to do it. So Potluck Insurgency, at the beginning of the program, Emily talked a little bit about our mission. Our part of our articulated mission that we, generated 5 or 7 years ago now, I guess, was to help elect Democrats up and down the ticket. So it was a pretty obvious decision for us to say, hey, we need to help Rita. It's really fundamentally important that we do what we can to help Rita get going. So Potluck Insurgency is going to do an in-person fundraiser a month or 4 weeks from tonight, Sunday, or afternoon, I guess. Sunday, March 19th at 3 o'clock. We're still working on the venue. Probably it's going to be Terry Trueblood, but we'll be getting details on that out in the next few days. We do, however, already have the Act Blue link ready to go for the fundraiser. So should Zach or Jennifer say anything tonight that inspires you to wish to begin donating right this minute, and keep in mind that you can always donate now and then donate again later. We would love to have you do that. It's really, really important work, and we've got to do it. We've just got to, you know, put our shoulder to the wheel, or whatever the right metaphor should be, and get this done in Iowa. We just can't keep sinking farther and farther down than we have. So Jennifer and Zach, tell us what you think about why we should all consider donating to rebuild the Iowa Democratic Party. Jennifer looks like she's ready to go on this topic. I can tell.
Yeah, Roseanne, why don't I can start a little bit talking about the IDP and kick it over to Jennifer to talk about some of the big changes we're making on the messaging front. But
Okay.
you know, look, you know, I'm like a lot of you. You know, it's really easy to feel run down, to feel, frankly, despair, to feel cynical that, you know, they're like, what, you kind of throw up your hands and say, what can we do? I hope that you were also excited by Eleanor's presentation. I thought it was a fantastic run through of what you're actually able to do on a day-to-day level. And also to say this, you know, politics is the solution, right? What we are facing right now in this state is an enormous challenge. And we're seeing it not just in Iowa, but across the American Midwest. You know, these states that have been consistently supporting Democratic elected officials, candidates, moving, you know, to become more conservative. And the challenge that is ahead of us is not going to be an easy one, but it is absolutely something that is critical to the importance, not just frankly the future of our state, but to the future of the country. And so the thing that I keep, you know, like I've got friends who sometimes who want to say, oh, I'm going to move to Minnesota, or oh, I'm going to move to Wisconsin. And the thing that I've been saying for the last few months is that if you can afford to leave, you can afford to stay. We are staying here in Iowa. We are going to fight for Iowa. And we know that the work that's ahead of us is going to require us to try new ideas and face probably some frankly uncomfortable truths about the way that business as usual has been going in our state. I was really excited, just like Roseanne, to see Rita Hart step up. For those of you who haven't yet had the chance to meet Rita from one of her previous campaigns, she's a change maker. She's willing to say and react to difficult things and actually bring people together to find ways to move forward. One of the things that Rita was very excited about was a proposal from some of us elected officials coming together to say that we wanted to be more involved in supporting the next chair of the state party. We, as elected officials, have historically not had a formal seat at the table. We're obviously party leaders. We lead our caucuses. Rob Sands is a statewide elected official, but there hasn't actually been a real way for us as elected officials to work closely with the state party. And so one of the things that happened on the same day that Rita was elected chair of the IDP was the creation of a new steering committee, essentially kind of an executive committee within the state central committee, to give those of us who are elected officials a seat at the table so that we can help provide support, resources, leadership, advice, and work together in a more collaborative way. And that might not sound like a fancy new idea, but I will tell you, it is a completely new way of how our elected leadership interacts with the state party. And I certainly don't have any belief that a steering committee is going to solve every problem facing our state party, but I do know that it's going to be an important part of how we get everybody more on the same page, more organized. Some of you have heard me make this observation before, but there's an old Will Rogers line about how I'm not a member of an organized political party. I'm a Democrat. And as a part of trying to prove Will Rogers wrong, getting our elected officials working more closely with our state party leadership. And I would say that this also has to happen at the local level. Making sure that our elected officials are more involved with their local campaign efforts is really important. And I'll be the first person to say that, speaking personally, I think there's more that I could have done, even though I didn't have an opponent, to be more directly involved in our local campaign efforts. I know that the JC Dems had a great campaign committee. that came together over the late spring and summer that did some really good work. And I think that our elected officials, and Eleanor, I'm looking at you and everybody else, we got to get together ourselves and figure out how are we going to do a better job of working as a team to support our local folks on the ground. So that's going to be an ongoing process, and we'll all work together on that. But I hope that's something that we can do across the state, because that's how this is going to turn around. It is literally going to be neighbor to neighbor conversations that we have with our friends, our neighbors, and then, you know, starting first kind of Democrat to Democrat, and then expanding across to independents, Republicans, and talking about how we are offering a new positive vision for the future of our state that hopefully will resonate with them. So it's going to be a lot of work, and getting that message out is something that I know Representative Conforst is an expert in, and has a lot of thoughts on how we kind of revamp our communications efforts in the state. So I'll turn it over to her to bring it home.
Yeah, and I won't keep you long here. I'm happy to have, you know, we're doing trainings on branding across the state, and happy to give, you know, you folks information about how to sign up for one of those. But at the end of the day, you know, on election night, Zach and I talked and said, you know, we're gonna be part of this effort to lead this party forward. And we made the deal that night. And when Auditor Sand won, you know, we brought him into the fold. And then when Rita Hart was willing to step up, we really felt like we had a lot of conversations with her as she was, you know, thinking about this. And at the end of the day, she has a vision that I think is holistic, is collaborative, and is new. And I think that she's got a lot of really important things to bring to the table. So I'm thrilled that she's there. I will say that, you know, Zach gives the quote about Will Rogers a lot. I often say, to the many people's dismay, the plural of anecdote is not data. And we have governed by anecdote for a long time, and run this party by anecdote in many ways. And I think that it's time we start having some data. And so, for example, instead of just looking at Republicans, you know, messaging one way to Republicans, one way to Democrats, and one way to no party voters, we're using research to dig down and figure out what kind of Democrats there are, what kind of Republicans there are, what kind of no party voters there are, so that we're using our time and our messaging more efficiently. And at the end of the day, we're working on a branding effort that is going to take 10 years. We are a year into it. And that doesn't mean we're not going to be there right away. It means that we're taking a couple steps toward it every year, so that Iowans will believe our message. What we know for a fact is that Iowans are sick of politics. They're sick of politics, and they're sick of Republicans and Democrats. They're just a little more sick of Democrats than Republicans right now, because we've been defined nationally. They don't like any of us. So instead of trying to convince them that we're better than Republicans, why don't we go to Iowans and ask them what they want? Why don't we listen to them and show them where our values align with theirs, and lead, you know, campaigns that put people over politics, which is what we've been working on. And that effort is, we're continuing to adjust and adapt. We're doing research right now on the election in terms of what happened, what Iowans think about our messaging. But, you know, we've been hearing for a long time, Democrats need a message, Democrats need a message. And I, as someone who teaches political communication and public relations and has done it for about 25 years, will tell you that the message doesn't matter until we have a brand that is strong and that Iowans believe in, because we can scream about our issues wide. The perfect example of that is the fact that vouchers are unpopular with 77% of Iowans, and we lost seats this year. So now I'd also argue they didn't run on vouchers, but that's a different story. So we've got to make sure that Iowans are open to hearing our message, and then give them the message that's focused on what they want. So we've been engaging in a lot of research and building a branding framework that we think causes a lot of, or allows us to have conversations in a different way with voters, that allows us to meet voters where they are. And we're seeing some progress there. We'll continue to do that. And we're trying to keep a database of toolkits, you know, ways that we use this messaging and this branding framework in print, TV, online ads, and communication during the 2022 cycle, then evaluating that now, doing an audit, and moving forward. This is an effort that the hard part about comms, and like I said, I've done this since 1994. The hard part about comms is that everybody knows how to do it. But because everybody communicates every day and everyone receives communication every day. So the only two caveats I'll put out there are, we need to make sure we're making decisions in communication based on what Iowans really want, not what we think they want or what we hear, because a lot of us are in bubbles. And secondly, we need to make sure that just because we're not seeing messaging, it doesn't mean it's not happening. If you are all seeing messaging about Democrats nonstop forever and ever, we might have wasted some of our money, because you're already with us. And so you have to, you have to understand that when we target more specifically, sometimes that messaging goes to folks that we don't see. So it's really part of educating folks on how we can have this communication in a way that's truly collaborative. And Rita Hart is on board with this way of looking at communication, and she's going to have a great comm shop built at IDP. We're looking to create a resource for all campaigns and party groups outside of IDP so that everybody can use different kinds of money. Everybody can have communication resources. We're working on this collaboratively, and we're really excited. So I will stop talking because I could go on about this forever. But
well, fortunately, Jennifer and Zach, you'll have that opportunity. In fact, if you have enjoyed hearing from these talented people here tonight, they are going to be with us in person 4 weeks from tonight, along with Rita. I mean, her memo is a wonderful starting point. I hope you read it. It's 11 pages long. It's worth it. But I think we'll be hearing more specific plans that are evolving as time goes along when we meet in 4 weeks and have Jennifer and Zach and Rita with us in person. So we're very excited about doing this event. And I want you to know, we have a very ambitious fundraising goal for this event. So I hope that, a lot of you here tonight will pitch in and you'll let your friends and family know about the event as well. We want to see you there and have fun, but we need to raise some money too. So thank you all so much. Fabulous speakers tonight. Eleanor, you did such a great job. Ed, thanks as always for facilitating. And Emily and Jean, thank you so much for your help with facilitation. Tonight's recording will be on our YouTube channel. Probably tomorrow. I'll send an email to everybody on the registration list for tonight, so you have the link to the YouTube channel. And hope to see you in 4 weeks. Thank you, everybody. Good night.